Hey, so apparently we don't understand what understand means. What is that about? Well, that was the last piece of the puzzle, of my puzzle, right? The last thing I had to understand, or understand, I prefer this word now, to reach this Kundalini awakening, heart liberation. That's when it happened. Once I understood basically what was in the conscious mind versus what's in the unconscious mind. So this is going to be the first video of a series that I will make on exactly how my shadow work went. For me, it was a pretty intensive, like a shadow work intensive. It lasted 2 months and a half. And during this 2 months and a half, I was not sleeping. I wasn't doing anything else than this shadow work studies. It was like a study in psychology. And I did it in a very intensive way. So intense that I believe I was thrown into an altered state of being, where I wasn't sleeping, I had all these questions coming, and I had to look them up right away. Like, there was no time to waste. I was completely absorbed by the process, and I was going for it non-stop. Like, I would wake up at 3 in the morning and be like, oh my gosh, but what is this? And then have to go sit with my phone and Google it right away. And there was nothing else I was willing to talk about. There was nothing else I was willing to do. My friends kept inviting me. Hey, let's go out to the festival. Hey, let's go for a drink on the terrace. Hey, let's go to the mall. My mom would say, could you just go to the mall? Think about something else. And I was like, no. So basically, yeah, it was like a studies in psychology, a very heavy study in psychology. Mainly understanding trauma, how traumas were stored in the subconscious mind, and then how this unconsciously controls our behaviors, and how this is then intergenerational trauma and the whole human condition and how everybody's in it. And yeah, that was all a very hard process. But it ended with, after understanding most of the subconscious, understanding now what's in the conscious part of the mind. And this is where all the pieces of the puzzle were completed, and I got to liberate. So this is why I want to make a series on this information, because it might be useful for someone else's process. And yeah, I know shadow work is not the favorite subject. It's not an easy subject. It's really hard to face your shadow, but it's, I think, the most essential thing if you do want to reach that liberation. So I've taken some notes here. Sorry, I'm just gonna make sure I keep going in the right order. Yeah, so the last piece of the puzzle for me was to understand the conscious part, after I had to understand the unconscious. But today I want to start the first episode with the last piece of puzzle, just in case it's the last piece of puzzle for you too. You know, we often hear about this, working through your traumas, childhood wounds, and so probably a lot of people already touched that subject and are pretty much already advanced with that, hopefully. I personally never did any shadow work or childhood trauma, or I was one to think that I was, not affected by my traumas. My childhood was in the past and I was way over that, and it wasn't affecting my present life, until I finally discovered that it wasn't the case. So, yeah, how did I understand? How did I understand exactly what's in the conscious versus what's in the subconscious was thanks to a book that I got for my birthday. My sister got me this book. Like, this whole shadow work process also was out of my control. Like, I did not choose to study any of the things that I studied. Everything just came to me by pure synchronicities. So basically it was like magic. And then me being in this state where I was so obsessed and fascinated and passionate about all these subjects that were normally not be subjects that I care about, you know, be going so deep into mental health and toxic behaviors and narcissism and all these things were like not very interesting normally. But I was in this altered state of being, and this is all I wanted to eat. So anyway, the last part was a book my sister got me. It was called Spiritual Detox. That's a book from Dr. Sadeghi. And apparently Dr. Sadeghi is very popular. He lives in California, I believe, and works with like Hollywood superstars. And it was weird because I told one friend about this book and she wanted to get it, but she couldn't find it in English because my book was in French. The Spiritual Detox, it was called. But then in English, we searched for it on Amazon in Canada, on all the big libraries, websites, and we could not find this book in English. And that's something that I find very weird. So anyway, I didn't have to read the whole book. It was actually a book on a 40-day program on how to lose weight. So my sister, when she realized that, she was like, oops, I didn't know it was about losing weight. But basically what Dr. Sadeghi says is that his technique for losing weight is actually applicable to anything you want to achieve, because everything works from the mind. So if you have a mindset that you're going to get fat, you'll get fat. And if you have a mindset that you're not going to get fat, then you can eat whatever you want and you don't get fat, because everything is in your head. So that's basically big picture of what Sadeghi's book was about. But in the beginning of the book, the part that I read, there was something where he said that we don't understand what understand means. So this is where I was like, wait a second, what is this about? What do you mean we don't understand what understand means? And the thing is that in French, the word understand is comprendre. So comprendre, he would explain that it's prendre, to take, and com, the community. So comprendre was to take the community opinion, and that was comprehend. What you comprehend is taking the community's information and take it as your comprehension. So anyway, in English, understand. What does understand mean? Well, it kind of, if you think about it, literally would mean standing under. Maybe that's why the book wasn't published in English, or not available in Canada anyway, in English, because once you understand that word this way, standing under, it gives you like such an imagery that it kind of makes it very clear that you're only standing under what you're told. And that is understanding, a very, very, very commonly used word. So standing under what we're told, that's what we have in our conscious mind. Sorry, I'm just gonna put myself back together here. Yeah, okay, so there's something else that I understood before, to put this together. When I was studying about the subconscious, I learned that the subconscious mind divides from this conscious mind at the age of 5 or 6. Like human beings, at the age of 5 or 6, become aware that they are an individual. So this is like the individualization of the human mind. And, well, this is actually why all childhood wounds are basically the wounds that you got before 5, and then after 5, this divides and the wounds stay in your unconscious, and your subconscious, the unconscious, subconscious, and basically that's when the wounds store in your subconscious and you become unconscious of your subconscious, and you only start working with the conscious part of your brain from then on. Therefore, all we understand in this life is everything that we were starting to store into the data that we started to store into our conscious mind from the age of 5. And that's why we don't remember much of our lives before the age of 5, because at that age there's like this division that happens between, like, inside your mind, inside your brain. And from 5 on, we start working exclusively with our conscious mind. Because before 5, the conscious and the subconscious is all kind of mixed together, and we can work with both. That's why kids before 5 don't really know how to make the difference between dreams, imaginations, and reality. And I've tested that. I tested that because I had the chance to work with one of my nephews that was exactly 4.5 years old when I was going through this process, this intense study in psychology, and therefore I had conversations with him about dreams, about imagination, about just testing him, see if it was true that he didn't make a difference between dreams, imagination, and reality. And it was. He was confused about something he dreamt about, thinking that this happened for real, closing his eyes, seeing things, and thinking that, oh, this must be my imagination. It's impossible that I can see a dragon outside the house. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's your imagination. Oops. Helping on the programming, because once we only work with our conscious mind, then we're told that forget about imagination, forget about dreams, this is all unreal. The only thing that's real is what you can see with your eyes in front of you, and that 3D reality right there, that is your reality, and that's it. So from 5 and on, that's when we start putting in all the data, all the information, all the stuff. And all the stuff that is going to be your reality from then on is basically very influenced by your education, your belief system, therefore your culture. So depending on your culture and where you grew up and what kind of social situation, family, social status you grew up in, you're going to have a different reality. You're going to have a different information and programming stored into your conscious mind, which is the reality you work with. For example, when I was 9 years old, I went on a vacation with my family to Japan. Because I'm half Canadian and half Japanese, but I was born in Canada and grew up in Canada, so for us, every year we would celebrate Christmas. And we would even go to church for Christmas, because my whole Canadian family would go to church for Christmas. So I had this, habit. And one year when I was 9, we went to Japan for Christmas. And what happened then? There was no Christmas. That was quite the shock. I was like, what? What do you mean there's no Christmas? Why did we come to Japan for Christmas if there is not going to be any Christmas? And my mom said, well, because here in Japan we're not Catholic. We don't believe in Jesus was born on the 25th of December, so because we're Buddhist and Shinto, so we don't celebrate Christmas. And that was such a disappointment for me, little kid. I'm like, what about my presents? But anyway, on New Year's, they did celebrate New Year's, and they did give us little envelopes, red envelopes with money in it, so I still got my presents like that. But that was, as a young age, something that happened where I realized that, wait a second, then, Christmas is optional. You can do it or not do it, like, really doesn't matter. And yeah, so a lot of things like that were helping me open my mind when I was very young because of that multicultural aspect of my persona. So within all the trips to Japan, I could very often observe that Japanese people would do things very different than Canadian people would do things. And so I was like, well, who's right? Both. Everybody's right. You can do whatever you want, basically. Another example is one day in Japan, I walk into the house and I forgot to take off my shoes. And my aunt just freaked out. She's like yelling, like, "What?" I'm like, "What happened?" She's like, "Your shoes." I'm like, okay. I go back to the door and take off my shoes. And then I was like, well, what's the big deal? What a freak. And then in Canada, in my house, we do take off our shoes as a habit, I guess because my mom is Japanese. But if I was just going to go inside the house to get something real quick and get back out, I might not take my shoes off for that. And it wouldn't be the end of the world. So there's another example where, something so important and so crucial in one culture is completely meaningless in another culture. So there's where I realized that, there's many different realities depending on where you live and what kind of lifestyle you have. So basically, how I finally understood that we only have that in our conscious mind, because once I read that in the book, you don't comprehend what comprehend means, you don't understand what understand means. I was like, what the heck? And I closed the book and I sat down to reflect on that. And it took me a whole week to finally get it. I had to think about it, and it was like a big mystery for a whole week. And finally something happened with my nephew, the 4.5-year-old nephew. And this is what made it click for me. That's how I finally got it. And what happened was that one morning, it was fall. Yeah, it was beginning of September, just before my awakening. And so the nephew was going to kindergarten. And in the morning, we're getting ready to bring him to kindergarten. And my sister's telling him, put on your socks. And then he's like, no, I don't want to put on my socks. And she's like, yeah, you have to put on your socks so you can put on your shoes. Let's go. We gotta get ready. And then the kid is like, no, I'm not gonna put on my socks. And then he's like, because I'm gonna go to kindergarten in my sandals. And then we were like, no, you cannot go to kindergarten in your sandals. You have to go in your shoes. And then he was like, what do you mean I can't go to kindergarten in my sandals? And then he rushed to the door and started putting on his sandals. And then he stood up and be like, look at me. I already have my sandals on. Now I'm going to kindergarten, and I can go to kindergarten in my sandals. And so then I was like, wait a second. No, we're saying that you can't go to kindergarten in your sandals, not because you actually cannot physically do that, but because it's getting cold outside. We're beginning of September, it's fall time. So now that it's cold outside, it's not summertime anymore. In summer, we wear sandals. When the fall comes, we stop wearing the sandals and we wear the shoes. And so what is this? That's the community organization. This is something that the community already talked about in Canada. And when it's hot summertime, we wear sandals. And once the cool weather comes, we switch from sandals to shoes. And this is just an agreement that our community has, that this is how life works, right? So I kind of had to explain that to the kid, that no, it's because it's getting cold outside. So you cannot go to the kindergarten with your sandals on because you might get cold, because the weather's getting cold. So then he was like, okay, now he got it. And then accepted to take off his sandals and go put on the socks and the shoes, because now he had a logical explanation. Logical, if we want it to be logical. But the truth is that technically, in the real reality of things, there was the possibility to, even if it's cold outside, I'm still going to go with my sandals on. And maybe I'm going to be cold, but maybe I don't care. But he's not, at an age to take that decision or that risk, so he has to obey and stand under the idea that he needs to understand that now it's fall and we're putting shoes on. And this is when this becomes his reality in his conscious mind, because now he's accepted to take that as his own truth. I guess that makes sense like that. That's exactly where it clicked for me. I was like, yeah, putting on shoes to go to kindergarten is only a community accepted belief. But it's not necessarily the absolute truth and reality of everybody. For example, here in South America, I was just in Pisac, Peru, and the Maima, she's from the Amazon, close to the Amazon, south of Colombia, and she was my shaman when I did the ayahuasca, which is another whole story. But anyway, she came up to Pisac, where I was in Peru, and I was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? What a coincidence, what a synchronicity. Like, is she meant to be part of my life? I think so, but soon I will meet with her again. And when she was in Pisac, it's cold weather, and she was wearing her sandals, because her outfit is wearing sandals. And then I noticed that a lot of the indigenous people, even in the Andes of Peru, always walk around in their sandals. And it's quite cold out there. It's cold out there. But that's their outfit, with the sandals on. So they wear their sandals even if it's cold. Can you believe that? Yeah, that is another reality. So basically, how we stand under is that people up top of the pyramid would tell us what's our reality, and we people on the bottom of the pyramid just take that as our truth. And this is what we work with, right, into our conscious brain. And that's it. So we walk with it with like, little robots. No questions asked. This is my reality. I've been told, and I'm standing under that. So yeah, beautiful imagery here to help us understand very easily what understand means. So in the spiritual community, they often call this the programming. And they say that we need to get rid of the programming. And so yeah, because once we accept to understand something, then we take it as our own truth, and then we defend it, and we want to be right. And so when we truly believe in something, then it's really hard to kind of switch it around and stop believing in it. And that is true for many, 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 many things. And so this is basically our programming that they say that we need to get rid of during the spiritual awakening process, so that we can start to see things as they are and not as we were told they are. Therefore, we need to go through making our own experiments, making our own observations, making our own conclusions, and then figuring out if it's really true, or if it's a truth that we want to accept, or if it's not necessarily resonating with our observations and our experiences and what we can think through every situation on a deeper level. And this is how we can maybe open our mind to change that programming, to change those beliefs, to change the belief system that we work with. And that is not easy. Not easy. And I consider myself very lucky because that programming was kind of open since a young age for me because of my intercultural. And then because I had a life of travel, and I've observed many different places and many different ways of doing things, and I already kind of was aware that there's different ways of doing things in different places, and that really opened my mind and helped me with having this programming, like sometimes yes, sometimes no. Oh yeah, I can change my mind quickly. I can change my programming quickly because I already know that this is something flexible, let's say. So what's the conclusion here? By the way, little parenthesis. When we talk about ego, ego is part of the conscious mind. Yeah, because when we're 5 years old, this is when we become aware that we're an individual human being, and this is where basically the ego is born. Yeah, I could say it like that. We discovered that we're an individual being because before 5 years old, the way we see ourselves is me, and then mom, and then dad. And we also have this natural instinct, survival instinct, from 0 to 5, where we know that we are not going to be able to survive on our own. So we really need to have mom and dad to take care of us if we want to survive in this world. That's why mom and dad's attention is so crucial up until that age, because everything is a question of life or death for a kid between 0 and 5. If my mom's not paying attention to me, I'm gonna die. So anyway, we'll talk more about that in the childhood wounds, I guess, episode. But yeah, for a kid, everything is a question of life or death. And then from 5 years old or 6 years old, around there, this separation happens, and then the kid realizes that actually I'm gonna become a grown-up like my mom and like my dad, and so I'm gonna be an adult and I'm gonna live on my own, and I'm not gonna need my mom and my dad to survive. And actually from that age around, this is where like kids who live on the street start going off on their own and go beg for their own money and their own foods, and they realize that they can do that themselves and they don't need to wait for mom and dad to hand them the food. They actually now know that they're an individual and able human being, able to survive on its own if it had to, basically. So this is also when the ego is born, and so the ego only knows what he was taught and trained and programmed to think of life in this life. And so take away the programming and you take away the ego's power over you. Yeah, take away the programming equals to taking away the power of the ego over you. And this is where you are able to tell your ego to sit down on a chair next to you and be quiet. And then you take the control over your life. So I guess that's how it works, more or less. And this is going to be it for this one. So thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Much blessing, much love.